In this video, we'll do an exam review on cellular immunity, which is a part of the adaptive immunity. Few important questions before we do the topic. Question number 1. Where do T lymphocytes reside in the peripheral site? Number 2. What's the fate of the T lymphocyte after they migrate from the thymus? Number 3. What's T cell superantigen? And number 4. What are T memory cells? Adaptive immune system is characterized by antigen-specific response to pathogen. So it's an antigen-specific response to pathogen. Following the initial contact with the pathogen, the subsequent immune response is quick. Why? Because the body's defense cells have memory for that pathogen and recognize it very quick when it attacks later. So which cell bring about the specific immunity against the pathogen? B and T cells, except the NK cells, bring specificity and immune memory to the host defense. The two types of adaptive immunity are cellular immunity and humoral immunity. So let's discuss a cellular immunity. It's done by T lymphocyte or thymocytes produced in the bone marrow. Bone marrow is a pluripotent stem cell that can produce all type of hematopoietic cells, and they mature in the thymus throughout the adulthood. So how do thymus matures them? Thymus produces thymosin and other substances to help to mature T lymphocyte or thymocytes, and defects in cellular immunity generally results in viral, fungal and mycobacterial infections. So cellular immunity is done by T lymphocyte or thymocyte produced in the marrow and matured in the thymus by supervision of thymosin and other thymic substances, and the defect in cellular immunity produces viral, fungal and mycobacterial infections. So where are the T lymphocytes? 2% of the T lymphocytes are in the peripheral blood, and 70 to 80% of the peripheral T lymphocytes are in the number 1 lymphoid tissue, spleen and tonsils, and number 2 in the mucosal sites and the mucous membranes of gastrointestinal, genitourinary and respiratory system, in the lungs, the small and large intestine, and in the skin. Now what's the fate of T lymphocyte after they migrate from the thymus? Majority of the T lymphocyte in the peripheral blood, spleen and lymph node transform into CD4 or the helper cell, which produce interleukin 2, interferon gamma, TNF alpha and beta, and number 2 CD8 plus cells or cytotoxic or killer T cell. They also produce cytokines. So 2% of the lymphocytes are in the circulation and 80% in the lymphoid organ, and after they migrate from the thymus they are transformed into two types of cells, CD4 or helper cells and CD8 or the cytotoxic or the killer cells. So CD4 and CD8 T cells, they mature in the thymus and migrate to the peripheral immune system. So where do they reside? In the peripheral site. They reside in the lymph node or spleen, and in the lymph nodes they reside in the paracortical area, and in the spleen they are in the periarteriolar area. So the lymph node, the T lymphocyte, 2% in the circulation, 80% in the lymph nodes, and then they transform into CD4 and CD8 cell, and in the lymph node they are in the paracortical region, and in the spleen they are in the periarteriolar area. Both CD4 and CD8 T cells, they produce cytokines that regulates or assists the immune response, and the interferon gamma attacks the intercellular microbe, and interleukin types 4 and 5 attacks the extracellular microbe. And then T cell differentiate in memory type of T cell. So what are memory T cells? The T cells are converted to memory T cell and resides in the peripheral lymphoid organs. There are two types of memory cells, the central memory cells and number 2 effector memory T cells. So the central memory T cells, they reside in the peripheral lymphoid organs and in the peripheral circulation, and they replenish effector memory T cell as needed. The memory T cells quickly expand to form effector T cell upon re-exposure to antigens. So these are the cells, central memory T cell, which quickly expand to form the effector memory T cell, and they reside in the peripheral lymphoid organs and in the circulation both. Whereas the effector memory T cell, they reside in the non-lymphoid tissues. Why? Because they lack lymph node homing receptors and are found in the peripheral circulation and tissues. So the central memory T cells are found in lymphoid organ and circulation both, but effector memory T cells are only found in the peripheral circulation and tissues and in the non-lymphoid tissues because they lack the lymph node receptors, and they are the cells which act quickly against the pathogen with cytokine production and cytotoxic function to kill the virus infected cells, for example. So it's the effector memory T cell which are readily available, act quickly against the pathogen, produce cytokine and are cytotoxic to the viral infected cell. Once activated, the T cells enlarge cytotoxic killer cells, divide and produce complement independent lysis of the foreign cells. So these T cells, they produce complement independent lysis of the foreign cells. So these T cells produce lymphokines and are responsible for defense against viral infection, fungal infection, some bacterial infection like tuberculosis, intracellular bacterial infection. They also act in delayed allergic reaction and in the rejection of the foreign tissues and grafts and in the transplants. And the drugs used to prevent transplant rejection, the drugs used are immunosuppressive drugs. Examples of them are azathioprine, anti-lymphocyte globulin, glucocorticoid, and cyclosporine A. So the T lymphocytes against the viral and fungal infection, intracellular bacterial infection, and in the graft rejection and transplant. And the drug used to prevent transplant rejections are azathioprine, anti-lymphocyte globulin, glucocorticoids, and cyclosporine. Now CD4 cells. CD4 type of T cells are also the primary regulator of T and B cells and monocytes. So they are the CD4 are the regulators of T and B cells and the monocytes, and they produce cytokines, and by direct cell contact, these helper T cells regulate B cells directly and other cell population indirectly. So they help other B cells. These helper T cells help B cell to form the plasma cells, memory cells, activate cytotoxic T cells, and macrophages. Other than these, T cell also regulate erythroid cells and they activate the B cell, as I already told. Now T cell superantigen. Conventional antigen activates less than 1 in 10,000 T cells, and superantigen activate up to 20% of the peripheral T cell pool. So usually an antigen activate less than 1 in 10,000 T cells, but a superantigen activate up to 20% of the T cell. An example of the superantigens are staphylococcal enterotoxin, toxic shock syndrome toxin, and streptococcal pyrogenic toxin. So these superantigens activate 20% of the T cell. So when they are activated, they produce more cytokines, more cytotoxicity. So the overproduction of the T cell cytokine, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, interferon gamma, and alpha. What do they cause? They cause hypotension and shock. This is what is T cell superantigen. Now answers to the question. Number 1. Where T lymphocytes reside in peripheral sites. After migrating from the bone marrow, they mature in the thymus and migrate to the peripheral immune system. And in the peripheral immune system, in the lymph node, they reside in the paracortical areas in the lymph node, and in the spleen, they reside in the periarteriolar area. Number 2. What's the fate of T lymphocytes after they migrate from thymus? Majority of the T cells in the peripheral blood, spleen, and lymph node transform into two types of cells: CD4 or helper cells, which produce interleukin, interferon gamma, TNF alpha, and beta, and number 2, CD8 type of cells or cytotoxic or the killer cells. Question number 3. What's T cell superantigen? We already discussed T cell superantigen briefly here. Conventional antigens activate less than 1 in 10,000 T cell, whereas superantigen activate 20% of the T cell. Example of the superantigens are staphylococci enterotoxin, TSS toxin, and streptococcal pyrogenic exotoxin. Question 4. What are T memory cells? T cells are converted to memory T cells and reside in the peripheral lymphoid organs. Two types of memory T cells are central memory T cell and number 2, effector memory T cell. So what's a central memory T cell? It resides in the peripheral lymphoid organs and in the circulation. And number 2, they replenish the effector memory T cell as needed. The memory T cell quickly form effector T cell upon re-exposure to an antigen, and they are responsible to replenishing the effector memory T cells. Now the effector memory T cells, they resides in the non-lymphoid tissues because they lack lymph node homing receptors, and they are found in the peripheral circulation and in the tissues, and they are number two, they act quickly against the repeated pathogens with cytokine production and cytotoxic function to kill the virus affected cells.